Listening 6, Anthropology class.
Listen to part of a discussion in an anthropology class.
Before we start, does anyone have a question about the reading assignment? Yes, Jim.
Just wondering whether I have a good handle on the concept of power. The book said it was the ability to exercise influence and control over others.
Right. And this can be observed on every level of society, from, well, the relationships within a family to the relationships among nations.
Okay, but then the book, it goes on to say that power is usually structured by customs and social institutions or laws. But then I read that power can be exerted by persuasive arguments or coercion or even brute force.
Sounds like you got it. But is there a question?
Well, it sounds like, in general, groups with the greatest resources, it sounds like they always have an advantage in power struggles. So I was thinking that power is not really justified, because it could involve resistance. I mean, some people may oppose the individuals or groups in power, but they could still...
Impose their will?
Yes.
So you want to know whether power always involves force?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Because there was a sentence or two in there about legitimate power.
Okay. Well, actually, that is a perfect lead-in to today's lecture. You're right, Jim, that sometimes power is not viewed by society as justified, even though those in control are imposing their will. So, sometimes power is not legitimate. But what about power that is accepted by members of society as right and just? That is legitimate power. Now we're talking about authority, and that's what I want to focus on today. And then we'll come back to your question again at the end of the class. Okay. When individuals or institutions possess authority, they have a recognized and established right to determine policies, with the acceptance of those over whom they exercise control. Max Weber, the German classical sociologist, proposed 3 types of authority in society: traditional, charismatic, and rational or legal authority. In all 3 types, he acknowledged the right of those in positions of power to lead, with the consent of the governed.
So, if I get this right, power is the big category, but authority is a kind of power, when it's recognized as the right of the person or the institution.
Yes, when those under the authority of a leader or group give their permission. Got it?
I think so.
But in all 3 types of authority in society, Weber acknowledged the right of those in positions of power to lead, with the consent of the governed. So, how did Weber differentiate among the 3 types of authority? Well, he divided them according to how the right to lead and the duty to follow are interpreted, how the power is legitimized. In traditional authority, for example, power resides in customs and conventions that provide certain people or groups with legitimate power in their societies. Often their origin is found in sacred traditions. The example that most often comes to mind is monarchy, in which kings or queens rule by birthright, not because of any particular quality of leadership or political election, just because they have a claim to authority based on traditional acceptance of their position, and in some cases, their unique relationships with and responsibility in religious practices.
You mean like the royal families in Europe or the emperors in Asia?
Precisely.
Because the Queen of England, for example, she's the head of the Church of England as well as the monarch. I think that's right.
And that claim to authority is traditional.
But she really doesn't have much power, though, anymore, does she?
I see your point, but what is important is not how much power she has, but that the power is given to her by the people because of the traditional authority that she claims as the heir to the throne. Now, this contrasts sharply with charismatic authority, which is derived because of personal attributes that inspire admiration, loyalty, and even devotion. Leaders who exercise this type of authority may be the founders of religious movements or political parties, but it's not their traditional right to lead. What's important here is that their followers are mobilized more by the force of the leader's personality than by tradition or the law. So, when we think of charismatic leaders in the United States, who comes to mind?
Well, I can't think of anyone who is alive today, but maybe John Kennedy would be an example because he was able to get people behind him.
Good example. Kennedy was able to project a youthful and energetic image that people were proud to identify with.
Or Ronald Reagan. I prefer Republicans, Dr. Cooper. Reagan had a lot of charismatic appeal, and he exercised authority when he was in office.
Great! Now we have both parties represented. In any case, going back to Weber, to qualify for charismatic authority, a leader must be able to enlist others in the service of a cause that transforms the social structure in some way. So politics, especially at the highest levels, it often attracts charismatic leaders because it offers the opportunity for social change. Which leaves us with the third type of authority, legal rational authority, or power that is legitimized by rules, laws, and procedures. In such a system, leaders gain authority not by traditional birthrights or by charismatic appeal, but rather because they're elected or appointed in accordance with the law, and power is delegated to layers of officials who owe their allegiance to the principles that are agreed upon rationally, and because they accept the ideal that the law is supreme. In a legal, rational society, people accept the legitimacy of authority as a government of laws, not leaders.
So that would be a judge, then, as an example of someone with legal, rational authority.
Well, it might be a judge, but it could be a bureaucrat in an office, or even the president, let's say, like Richard Nixon, who was threatened with impeachment because he was perceived as not governing within the law. Do you see what I mean?
I think so.
Jim, is the difference between power and authority sorting itself out now?
It is.
Okay, then. Some sociologists have postulated that the three types of authority, the traditional, charismatic, and legal rational, that these types represent stages of evolution in society. That pre-industrial societies tend to respect traditional authority, but as societies move into an industrial age, the importance of tradition wanes in favor of charismatic authority, with a natural rise of charismatic leaders. Then, as the modern era evolves, the legal rational authority embodied by rules and regulations, it replaces the loyalty to leaders in favor of a respect for the law. Of course, other sociologists argue that in practice, authority may be represented by a combination of several of these ideal types at any one time.